can I have everyone's attention? I want to respect everyone's time and stay true to what we said, which was we were going to start at 6:30. Really quick, I'm Mike Kelly. I'm the General Superintendent of the Chicago Park District, and I certainly want to thank all of you for coming out on this chilly night for the first of two of the third phase of our framework plan. Throughout the night, you're going to see folks with name tags. Anybody who has a name tag either works for the Park District or Smith Group JJR. There's also a number of city folk here as well from CDOT and planning. Alderman Leslie Harrison of the Fifth Ward is in the back. And I'm going to give a short couple of talking points. Heather Gleason, our Director of Planning and Capital, may have a few things to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Greg Calpino from Smith Group JJR. So really quick, I just want to hit a couple of highlights. So this is actually our 9th public meeting. This is our 9th public meeting on the South Lakefront Framework Plan. It is our goal to come up with a framework plan that complements what we did back in '99, and it specifically talks about South Shore, all the green space around here, and Jackson Park. We've had at least 1,600 participants thus far in those first 8 meetings. Tonight we're going to share with you 3 options. There's going to be 3 scenarios. There is a ton of information tonight. Take pictures, use your camera phones. It is a lot. Each scenario, it's what we call a kit of parts. So you're going to see things in scenario 1 that you like. You're going to see things in scenario 2 you're going to like, and you're going to see things in scenario 3 you like, or don't like, quite frankly. All that information came from all those 8 meetings where we heard people and what they were interested in the parks. It's okay to like things in 1, 2, and 3. It's not like you're buying into one scenario. You can mix and match. Again, there's going to be a lot of different benefits you're going to like. Tonight we're not going to talk about golf, and you're not going to miss a beat on it because there is a ton of information. We are going to talk about golf when we're ready to talk about golf, but I think what's important to note is golf is absolutely part of this framework plan. We will not publish this framework plan without a robust set of community meetings just on golf. That is my commitment, and I've said it once and I'll say it again. We will not put a shovel in the ground on golf until I have adequate community support and financial support. I'm not there on either one of them, in my opinion, yet. I want the community to buy in, I want the community to support the golf, and I want to then get the financiers to back me on that because the Park District doesn't have the money to pay for it. I think that's it. I think that, again, come with an open mind. This is fun. You know, if you're all here for a reason, it's all because you care about your community, you care about your neighborhood, you care about your park. There's a lot you're going to see tonight. And come with an open mind, come with suggestions, come with a voice, come with the passion and whatever brought you here tonight. That's all I can say. Do you want to? All right, well, I'm going to turn it over briefly to Heather Gleason, our Director of Planning and Development.
Thanks, Mike. Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for coming. I know many of you have been with us for all 8 meetings, so we realize you're giving up a lot of your personal time in the evening to come here and be with us, so we want you to know how much we appreciate it. As Mike mentioned, this is the fun meeting where you're going to look at a lot of different options. I think it's fair to say we're pushing the envelope on several of them, and it's really to get you thinking about how you'd like to see the future of these parks develop. This is really our vision for the next 10 years. So just to set the stage a little bit this evening, this presentation is going to give you a very broad overview. I know you're going to have a ton of questions as you go through this. So what it's intended to do is we're going to have Greg go through a presentation to give you the big picture ideas in each of the scenarios. And then if you would move down to the dining room with us, that's where many of you might have already seen the board set up there. We'll have staff there to answer your questions and talk through the scenarios. And again, at the end, we'd really like you to evaluate the scenarios so that we can get some good feedback about what you're thinking about the different options that we're presenting tonight. But one of the other things I wanted to mention is hopefully you'll see as Greg goes through the presentation that a lot of the vision and the guiding principles of the plan were really developed from comments from all of you. So as you've come to our meetings and you've given us notes on stickies and boards and telling us what makes a great park and what makes a beautiful space and how can we really preserve the history and the character of these parks going forward, a lot of what you'll see tonight, hopefully you'll recognize your comments and the things that you've told us in previous meetings. So we want to make sure that we're carrying your thoughts forward from the community. And with that, I'll introduce Greg Galpino as a principal with Smith Group JJR to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Heather. I always start off with a quick show of hands. So how many folks have been at the previous meetings so far? All Rice is good. How many newcomers? Well, again, welcome to both. Thank you to all those who have been part of all the other meetings, and again, glad to have everybody else on board, and hopefully you'll keep coming. It's important. I was a big part of doing this back in 1999, and one reason that plan has really done its job longer than it was intended to do. It was supposed to be a 10-year plan. It's now in year 17 and 18 as we turn the calendar over, was because of the amount of input. It was really a way to gauge the community and to put a document together that reflected that and gave us a chance or a way to review proposals that were coming in, as well as things that were happening in the park over that time too. So it's just as important that this is grounded that way, and you being here is very important to that. So, what is a framework plan? Those who are new to the process, again, it's a long-term document, typically a 10-year document that, again, looks at a very high level. It's meant to be a living document. It's meant to be a tool that does prescribe some recommendations, tells where things should go, but also it's meant to give the park district and the community a way to evaluate proposals. Again, 10 years is a long time. Things change and things break, and people come with new ideas too. So sometimes it's good to say, does it match the aspirations of the community? So it's a good document for that. So that's really where we're at. But again, we also are updating a previous document too. So we're trying to be very mindful of the feedback that folks gave at that time as well. It's not a broken plan. It's just time to refresh it. So where we're at in the process, we are in step 3. We've cleared the halfway point, coming around the bend here into scenarios. Again, a lot of feedback back in September that, again, we were asking a lot of questions about, trying to frame what you wanted us to draw, what options to study. So we're doing that tonight as well as Monday if you come back here. Same bat time, same bat channel, different room down the hall, I think. But we'll do kind of the same presentation. So again, if you know folks who couldn't make it tonight, I know there's some other things going on, please tell them to come, or again, please come back as well too. As Mike said, there's a lot to digest too, so we're happy to see you more than once. And then once we get the feedback from this round, as well as the golf meetings that Mike mentioned, we'll start to craft a final framework plan into 2018. I don't know the dates quite yet, but that'll become the final master plan, and that will guide hopefully the next 10 years of the park. So again, folks who are in the room, hopefully some of you see your own faces in this room right here. We had over 1,000 people at that first round of meetings in June and July. We had 3 different meetings, 700 the first night. It was a lot of fun. Again, and it was a listening exercise. Again, it had been a while since we all chatted, so we were here to understand what's been working, what's not, how does the park want to evolve in the next 10 years. So intentionally weren't proposing things, listening. That started to form the basis for our September meetings, where we had I think 200 or 300 people at those meetings, where we started to show you our analysis, our findings, what we had heard, what we've seen. Validate that. You gave us a lot of new thoughts that you were seeing, as well as a lot of comments on some of the opportunities we should explore in terms of alternatives. So that was really the basis for the program and drawings you'll see here tonight, was really kind of the combination of those June, July meetings, as well as the September feedback. So again, thanks for folks who were part of those. And again, these are the direct words we heard from those meetings. This has been a lot of this on the website. But again, some of the key topics recreationally, sports fields and dogs and tennis and nature areas, the sanctuary. I think, again, a lot of water users, whether you're a fisherman, whether you're a boater, again, a lot of discussions on the harbors and the beaches, parking and access. And again, no shortage of comments about this facility that we are in here tonight, as well as the grounds of it as well too. So as Mike said, that's really part of the overall study. So we took all of those words and thoughts and came up with this community vision. I'm not going to read every word of it, but the idea is this is really what we anticipate the park to become or to remain. Again, a lot of these words exist today. It is a welcoming place for the community. It has a balance of active and nature, and I think we've heard loud and clear the role it plays in the community, connecting back to the community. So again, this is how we see the park remaining or becoming better at these as well, these aspirations, as the vision that came out of, as I'll sort of point out in Valerie's idea machine here. Where did those words come from? It's really a combination of the many meetings that we've been part of and website comments and such, as well as some of the words from the framework plan Plan in '99, again, which had a series of goals and principles, as well as, again, just our professional study, best practices, and seeing what's needed in the park, as well as trying to make sure this is in alignment with the Park District's vision as well, too, in their mission statement. So we take all of those, and that really generated the vision, which again is kind of what the park will become or remain, and how to get there. So the principles and goals are really kind of the actions that starts to become not only that drive these alternatives and how to judge those, but over the next 5-10 years, when proposals come along, you start to look at them in light of the drawings as well as these goals and principles. That's really kind of how a typical framework plan is done. So the principles that came out of at least as they stand as a draft today, first was this really kind of gets into sort of the recreational and programming side of the park, which is, again, it does a lot of. Again, it's a park for people. It's a balance, again, of nature and people. So serve the community, inspire the world. We recognize that this is the park that people walk to, they drive to, and they fly to with the types of destinations we have here, whether it's a local playground or whether it's an internationally significant institution like the Museum of Science and Industry or like the Obama Presidential Center. So trying to find that right balance and making sure that we continue to maximize recreation for all ages, and we find that, again, that comfortable balance of recreation, and we make sure that we not only connect physically, but we connect programmatically, spiritually, that, again, this park is a reflection of the community as well, too. So connectivity on all levels. Second, again, this is a very important green space. In a city as dense as Chicago, if you go back to the original historic plans, when these parks were done, they were literally the lungs of the city. We had a city that was full of smoke and soot, and this was the escape. And finding a place of quiet, respite, and finding clean air and finding birds and wildlife was important then, and it is today as well, too. But again, we have to balance that with that it was always a design landscape that was meant to be enjoyed by human beings as well, too. So finding that right balance of passive and nature is something that we want to make sure that we continue to advance. And then again, this is one of the most historically significant parks, definitely in Chicago, if not the country, with the Olmsted legacy and the many architects that have worked on it too. So making sure that we are respectful of that legacy, we maintain that. We also renew it. Again, I think this has never been a park that has been put in a glass box and preserved from day one. It has always evolved. It was designed to evolve. It was a park. It was a World's Fair. It was a park. It's always been in that cycle with those historic designers, and we really stand here today to make sure that we understand the right way to advance that cause, to reflect those values of those designers, but do it in a way that is, again, going to advance it into the next 10 years, 20 years, next century as well, too. So that's, again, a very important thing. So again, those principles all balance each other. There's a series of goals underneath of them that are really the actions that we will be judging our designs against. So Mike talked about there are many pieces. I think there's roughly 35, if I count my grid here, of different sort of pieces that we're looking at for different combinations or different alternatives of. It could be as small as a single building, it might be a statue, it might be an entire area, it might be a beach, a roadway. So we're really intentionally trying to find different combinations and different treatments. Some cases they may be very large changes, in some cases there may be no change. But we're looking at these various components around the park and different combinations as holistic schemes tonight, but also as we get feedback, it might be some mixing and matching of different ways that you like some more than others. It's a huge park, it's a lot to digest, so I'm gonna walk you through just sort of geographically north to south for not only kind of what's there today to ground you, but also what we are proposing in the schemes. And then my goal really is sort of the movie trailer here tonight. I'm to try to get you grounded and then get you down the hall to the open house where these boards, we have a lot of good detail and folks that will be positioned at the boards to answer a lot of questions and explain further. So just kind of what's there today, again, from the sort of the north quadrant, things like the Iowa building, the harbors, the existing music court, the Bowling Green, Columbia Basin, Museum of Science and Industry. So those are some of the big elements in that area that are part of the design. As you move further to the south in the sort of the central portion of the park, you get into Wooded Island, some of the sports fields and driving range areas, some of the larger meadows, as well as the running track. Again, this is where the Obama Presidential Center is proposed as well too. You start to get into 63rd Street Beach as well. Again, so these are some of the bigger elements that are in play with some of the alternatives. Moving further south, we're getting into the lagoons and the harbors and some of the support facilities for those, as well as the neighborhood edge along Stony, things like the field house, as well as maintenance facility, tennis courts, things like that. basketball, again, some more of the hard court games, the more active recreation happening there. And then finally, to the south where we're at here tonight, the cultural center, some of the nature spaces, the beach, picnicking, the stables, the beach house. Again, these are all things that we'll be looking at. So based on all of that understanding, as well as, again, your feedback, we have 3 scenarios that we'll walk through tonight. And then, as Heather pointed out, down the hall, we have very detailed boards on all of those for further discussion. So we'll start with scenario 1, which we call coastline. Each one sort of has a bit of a thematic name that is reflective of one of the bigger moves in the plan. Every scheme kind of, one of those principles really talked about celebrating and connecting water. That kind of goes back to the original design. It seems obvious with where we're at here on Lake Michigan, as well as the lagoons that are key to the piece of the park. Where this one really focuses on some innovation along the actual Lake Michigan shoreline. The rest of Chicago, the lakeshore has been systematically replaced and rebuilt over a series of the last decade or so with the Army Corps of Engineers. This section has not been worked on. There will be a day that it will need to be worked on as things are repaired and renewed. So it's important to have a vision for that so that when that happens, what's put in place may be something different and better, quite honestly, than what's there today. So this starts to introduce the idea that coastline is something a little more organic, a little more natural. It starts to bring in some elements besides just sort of rocks stopping the water. So some habitat beaches and some places even under the water that starts to bring in some shoreline fishing habitat, things like that. But it also looks at the idea of bringing in maybe some additional land in the process. One thing we've also heard from the boating community is the outer harbor has some issues with choppiness with waves. It also has some issues with being dredged a lot too. So there have been proposals over the years for breakwaters to address that. This illustrates the idea that maybe that breakwater is on the north side of the mouth and starts to provide additional land to enlarge the 63rd Street Beach Peninsula for some additional recreational areas, maybe for parking, maybe for some natural areas, maybe just for picnicking and such. That we've heard is very popular. So this idea of the coastline is one of the big drivers of this scheme. Kind of moving north to south kind of quickly, again, in that northern quadrant, some different scenarios. The Iowa building is a historic building along Lakeshore Drive at the north tip. In this concept, we look into picnicking for that to try to activate that. And we also start to activate some of the other play areas, as well as bring in other facilities that might support some special uses as well as daily uses. As we move into the central portion, some of the bigger ideas here would be one of the concepts with the Obama Presidential Center. It's at the location of the current running track, so that track would get rebuilt just to the south in that same corridor along Stony, between Stony and Cornell. This illustrates that as a track with the synthetic turf football field like you see today. You'll see in other concepts that changes a little bit. This starts to also pair that up with some other active recreation, things like tennis. The dog park would remain on the lakeshore, not where it's at today, but would move closer to just north of the inner harbor, so it would still be a lakefront facility in this case. And again, and some of the sports field, and there would be some of the reconfiguration of some of the sports fields at Hayes in this option. And then, as I mentioned, kind of moving to the south, we start to get into a little more creative use of the lakeshore. Again, thinking about how we start to repair that in the future in ways that provide some new amenities for the community, both in terms of the La Rabida edge, but also the idea that maybe 63rd Street can get some additional land and recreational spaces in the process. And then South Shore, there's some fairly consistent recommendations to South Shore. In all schemes, we're looking at the beach house. It's sort of past its prime. So the idea of what a new beach house could look like there in roughly the same location. The idea of starting to bring in some play elements, thinking about typical park beaches do have kind of that all-day recreation that I've got some play, I've got some places, the facilities, not just sands. Again, people want to be there and do things all day. Making sure that we're supporting the picnicking, making sure that, again, this facility is going to be restored as it's been proposed. So key piece of the process. And when you put it all together, this is what Scheme 1 coastline will look like. And again, as you go to the other room, there'll be a lot more detail and labels on all of this. For each of the schemes, I'm not going to go through the detail here. So if you are here to talk about a specific, you're interested in active recreation sports fields, or you're interested in trails or in the water, we've given you the ability with these how it works diagrams to really kind of drill into those details. So you'll have an overall plan, and you'll have these, so you can kind of get a sense of where the different pieces are, and a little kind of broken down, a little more understandable. So each scheme will have this. I just won't be presenting it here in this room tonight. So that takes us to scheme 2, which we call Meadows. Reason we call it Meadows, one of the big ideas here is, again, we recognize there's a lot of recreation, grass-based recreation in this park. Sports, picnicking, special events, just casual, hanging out, unprogrammed. So we're really trying to maximize that, and in some cases make them maybe a little more single-purposed or make them all work a little bit better. So if we can start to make the sports fields work better in different combinations, we're doing that, making sure picnic groves are the right size, have the right support with them, as well as making sure that those spaces are spread not just in the interior of the park, but also having some things on the neighborhood edge. So one big idea you'll see is at the location of the maintenance yard, on Stony and 63rd, that could become a flexible use meadow on the neighborhood edge that would start to bring some of that flex space and kind of continue that edge that we have more to the north of 63rd, would start to come south of that as well too. So really celebrating those meadows as well-defined, well-programmed spaces. This starts to also introduce one of the historic ideas of bringing some of the paddlecraft onto some of the waterways. In this case, we look at Columbia Basin. We recognize we can actually cordon off Columbia Basin from the rest of the lagoons. So if I paddle on Columbia Basin, I don't have to go in the lagoons. We've heard loud and clear that's a challenge and a concern of folks. We're also looking at maybe ways with boardwalks and, again, other facilities we can start to activate that. This scheme does also explore the idea of bringing a facility to the music court, whether that is what's been proposed previously or more, but something that starts to bring some support facilities to that historic site as was proposed. Moving further to the south, so we talked about meadows a little bit. One of the things we've also heard with the lagoons, again, historically, the lagoons were all connected. We had some Nike missile facilities back in the day that filled some of that in, and we have some water quality challenges as a result of that. We also have lost some of that habitat, some of that connectivity that came with that original design by Olmsted. So this kind of shows more of a measured approach, so it's inspired by that, but it also recognizes that there's a premium for those grass meadows. So this starts to show what we call a riverine connection that would connect the inner harbor with the lagoon system and starts to form a really kind of a defined space at the Hayes Meadows. We also start to activate that with some of the historic buildings. There's a historic shelter by the driving range. We're showing here in a rendering that could be programmed into something a little more than that, whether it's a restaurant or a cafe, something like you might have seen in Lincoln Park on the North Pond, where it starts to get some programmability that takes advantage of that scenery and becomes, again, a trailhead, a place to get a drink, things like that. This also starts to, in the name of the Meadows, looks at that running track modification along Stony as maybe a little bit wider shape that starts to accommodate soccer. Again, we've seen the park evolve into that soccer is becoming even more popular than it was back in '99. Maybe so the idea of having just a football field maybe is a little bit too limiting, so having it wider for soccer was something we're showing here. And then, as we get along the shoreline to the southern edges, it's a little more practical sort of reconstruction or repair of the shoreline. Takes the existing shoreline edge, but starts to green what's behind it. Right now, there's sort of that paved beach kind of along La Rabida. This shows the idea that maybe that becomes green space behind that. It would still stop the waves, but maybe there's a place for, whether it's lawn, whether it's some nature, that is kind of up to your input. It also starts to introduce some other paddlecraft or quiet boating into the inner harbor, recognizing that there's been a real market shift that people want to be in the outer harbor because of height restrictions on the inner harbor. So the idea, maybe we start to introduce some more recreation or more educational water activities in the inner harbor. This also shows, again, we've heard a lot of feedback about the field house, and other schemes show it renovated. This scheme says, well, if we're able to find the funding or the partners for that, do we build a new one? So this scheme actually shows the idea of being a new field house. All right, the first applause of the night. Thank you. And that one also showed, again, the idea that breakwater is protecting the outer harbor, but it did it on the south side. And then South Shore, I think the big difference here between the other scheme, again, it would still have the beach house. This one, the new beach house, the other amenities I showed before, but this one really starts to leverage the Lakefront Trail, which is being upgraded for the entire lakefront, as well as the underpasses at the one that we've been showing at 67th. That's in all the schemes, but we really kind of want to highlight that if you have that facility, the Lakefront Trail improvements, we all know the corner over here is very tough for a trail to get around and such. So this idea says maybe we start to massage the golf course edge a little bit to get that trail a little wider. We can come in along the corner on the inside of the park And that's not only makes the corner safer, but also maybe there's a new use for some of the stable buildings that starts to become a little more recreation or public use. So this idea is that maybe if the trail goes through there, it becomes more of a bike amenity facility, a trailhead facility, something like that, that starts to bring some life to that corner and becomes a great stop if you're on the regional trail system. And again, that's kind of what that looks like overall when put together. And then finally, lagoons. So this is scenario 3, and that name will become very obvious in a second. So again, Olmsted's original plan, one of the key features was an interior connected lagoon system that really defined the spaces around it. It defined the uses from nature, from the quality of nature, from the recreational uses of boating on it, the view corridors. It was a very important defining feature. So this scheme starts to at least echo that sentiment and provide a new version of that, of reconnecting that lagoon system with some new twists, actually, which we'll kind of get into. So again, kind of from north to south, the Iowa building in this location, in this option, would be the location for the dog park would move here. Actually, in scheme 2, the dog park would remain where it is today, actually. So we've shown 3 different dog park locations. In this scheme, again, one of the issues with the Iowa building, it's a great building. It's sort of isolated. It doesn't really have much going on around it to bring that sort of life to it. So we're trying to find an adjacent activity. So scheme 1 was really about picnicking and programming. In this case, again, we recognize the dog park is very popular. It does generate that activity. So let's put a dog park next to it. People can walk from the neighborhood, and it gives that building some life and some love with having that thing next to it. We also said maybe that there's ability to bring some of the tennis into the zone where the bowling green is today, as again, one of the options we're looking at for tennis. It does start to introduce some more fishing facilities really throughout the park, but start to think about Columbia Basin for that. It also starts to introduce the idea of the water taxi, whether that's, and where it goes, we're not sure. It could be something that goes within the park. I know that's something as this park with the Obama Center again, there might be the ability to actually, from the idea of a cultural ribbon, maybe I actually go from harbor to harbor within the park, or maybe I go to downtown. That's something to look at. But we would be integrating a water taxi into the harbor in this situation. As we move further into the center of the park, this is where the lagoon comes back, as you see in the scheme. And the idea of really, again, creating a space around that. One of the big ideas here is, again, if you look historically, the Statue of the Republic, or the Golden Lady, depending on your preference, used to be on the water. She wasn't in the middle of a traffic island. So yes, it's historic where it's at. Yes, it's very civic as a motorist, but if we're going to bring back the lagoon, we're going to really highlight the water. Let's put her back on the water. So this shows, if you see the rendering in the upper right, that she would actually be on the harbor edge of the inner harbor. And the inner harbor would go back to something a little more like it was originally intended to be. That would be more of a passive, nature-based lagoon versus a harbor. And we would really focus on the investment in the outer harbor being all it can be from a boating perspective, which was something that's, again, meets a lot of market and technical needs. We also start to look at that breakwater as something different, that maybe it's actually, as we get in the next slide here, people love to walk out on piers and look back at the city. It's one of the best views that you can have in any location that has water. So that breakwater would not only provide protection for the harbor, but protect a new destination, being a pier to walk on, but also having some facilities at the end. We call it the Lakefront Pavilion, so pretty exciting idea. And another big idea here is, again, as we start to restore that shoreline along La Rabida to something a little greener, is there a way to give it a support facility? Again, another kind of big idea that we want some feedback on, the Burnham building, which right now sort of sits right on the edge of the road in the golf course. Great building, but it's always struggled because of its lack of energy and things next to it. So it's in pretty bad shape too. So do we restore it? And in this case, we're suggesting that maybe we relocate it to a new location that would be part of a space that it might actually provide a little more support to. And then at South Shore, again, similar to Scheme 1, where we're looking at the boathouse, the beach house, some of the nature play, picnicking, and nature trails there. And that is what Scheme 3 looks like when pulled together. So again, high level, those are the 3 schemes that, again, in the other room, and please don't leave yet because we've got a couple more things, housekeeping things here. But those are the kind of highlights of the 3 schemes, which again are on boards in the other room for input. As we move forward, again, this is a really critical step that we get your feedback tonight, as well as next week when we have our meetings, as well as follow-up meetings, that we get this right, because this is really forming the foundation for that final framework plan and how we want to mix and match these pieces. So that'll happen again after the new year. We'll be back with a preferred draft plan. But tonight, there's lots of ways to give feedback tonight. There will be an exercise. If you don't have them already, you will have cards that look like this. Does everybody have cards? All right, show me your cards. All right. These reflect the guiding principles. So there is a color dot that relates to each principle. But what you're going to do, once you have fully digested the schemes and you've asked us all the questions you can ask us, there will be 3 boards in the other room that show the 3 scenarios, kind of like you see on the screen here, with a guiding principle at the top that's kind of color-coded. So you will do, and there will be people to help you through this. Eric in the back of the room, Eric will be your host for that. We will ask you to, so if you feel, for example, that scheme 2 best reflects the principle of steward environmental integrity and beauty, you would put your dot on that scheme again, and it may be different for everybody. So you may, at the end of the day, have a scheme that, 3 different preferences, quite honestly. One scheme may better fit a different principle than the other schemes, but that's how we're going to get feedback from you tonight to just get a gut feeling of which schemes best reflect the guiding principles. And again, that'll be explained to you in the other room in a little more detail. We also will provide this presentation as well as the schemes will be on the website. We fully anticipate that there's going to be a need to digest a lot of material here. What you do tonight is probably going to be a knee-jerk based on a lot of information, so please take it in, go to the website, and there will be an input tool, similar input tool on the website to do the same thing as well too. We have time, so we really want to educate you tonight, and then make sure the website's a good tool for that as well too. And so as my last housekeeping exercise, so down the hall, we've set up boards. The room looks about like this. So you are at the sign-in table. We're in the presentation right now in the solarium. You'll go down the hall. There'll be a series of boards as you enter the room that kind of goes over where we've been, the visioning process. As you enter the room, as you go clockwise, you'll be able to kind of walk through the process as we've been through and where we're heading if you have questions on that. You'll be able to then kind of speak with folks about the vision principles, understand those, ask questions. And then you'll be able to go station by station through the scenarios in greater detail. And then once you're ready, go around to the far end of the room where you'll have that evaluation exercise that I just spelled out to you. So that is, we're going to be here until 9 o'clock tonight. You don't have to stay till 9, but it's really an open house from now on. So at this point, you are dismissed and can head down the hall and start learning and start giving us feedback. So thank you.